recipes yourself.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, just
I feel
give.
like I
Yeah.
haven't done that in so long. Well, I'm Summer. Hi. So I'm currently running my business full time, or trying to anyways.
And what's the name of your business?
So the Perfect Bite Bake Shoppe is the name of the business. And then dessert bars is the chocolate kind of like line of things that I'm looking to really become the whole business. So the Perfect Bite will fall into the background, and I actually want chocolate to move to the forefront of things. So baker, chocolatier, business owner, marketing person, social media failer, every a lot of hats, a lot of hats.
Yeah. So when did you get started? When did the Perfect Bake Shoppe start?
So the Perfect Bite itself started, I think, 2015.
Mm-hmm.
So that was I had a blog actually for a few years at that point. I think the blog started in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing recipes kind of every waking moment that I could get. And then from the blog, the peer pressure to sell some of those products formed, and then the actual business started in 2015, but I didn't become like a registered licensed business until 2016, 2017.
Right.
So
So
as it
you
usually,
actually, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, it's as it usually happens, it takes a while to kind of become fully materialized.
Yeah, definitely. But you've been doing it for a while now,
Yeah,
2015. That's like,
yeah.
what, 6 years?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're closing in on your 6th year. That's amazing. And
yeah,
it's so interesting that you started out as a content creator
yes.
and actually was able to start a business from that. I don't know. For some reason, to me, it always like
Is the other way
other
around
way
usually.
around.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think if I'm honest, if I could get paid to just create the content, that would be a dream.
Right.
It's a lot to have to do everything, but I think doing the content creation first was really important because my skill set was really strong prior to starting a business. Whereas I think nowadays people are kind of wanting to start a business first and then figuring the rest out after. And with baking and food in general, there's a lot to know. So I think that can be frustrating sometimes when you're making those mistakes later in the
Mm-hmm.
game. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad that I got to, especially because the blog was mostly like healthy, like high protein, gluten free, a lot of vegan stuff. So it was harder to learn because there was not all of the information that we have now about specialty baking, but I'm glad that I got that basis because it was a lot of struggle. It was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good learning experience, I think.
That's awesome. How did you get into baking?
So I had an eating disorder for a long time. And so probably from 16, I would say to 24, food was everything. Everything, with anorexia, especially, you become really obsessed with food. And so when I was 16, I would take all my mom's cookbooks and I would read them front to back. Every section, every ingredient, every chemical composition that I could think of, and I would bake. I wouldn't eat it, but I would bake for people. And that just became like an obsession for me. So part of my recovery process, when you're an adult, you don't, nobody can force you into recovery, right? So when I was younger, I was forced to be a part of that system. And when I was kind of on my own, I realized nobody's going to help me get over this. This is going to be a struggle for the rest of my life if I let it be. And so I started to bake healthier alternatives to things so that I could gain an appreciation for the ingredients that I was eating. And so that I could kind of push that boundary. I didn't want food to be scary. I didn't want dessert, especially because that's, when people are trying to lose weight, that's the first thing that they're like, oh, no dessert. And it's like, I wanted to break that association. So that was it for me, really, quite simply. It was a way to gain an understanding of food and to improve my relationship with food.
Amazing. So that's a very unique way of discovering baking and
Yeah.
becoming a baker. So
Yeah.
I guess I would say, in terms of your education,
Mm-hmm.
What did that look like, your baking education?
So definitely not professional whatsoever. It was a lot of learning, trial and error. And I am like a cookbook fanatic. Beside me, I have like, probably close to 100 different books that I read on a regular basis. So just reading really. And the internet, I think at that point, in 2010, 2012, when I was actually starting to bake more seriously, there's not a lot out there. But the internet was definitely a big resource in the beginning. I mean, I have a master's as well in international relations. So I my academic experience, I think, complete opposite of baking, of course. So just books and videos and trying in trial and error and trying to figure that stuff out. And I think being a part of online communities too, where people were experimenting with different kinds of novel, flowers and aquafaba and all of these different kind of like alternatives, right? So just trying stuff out.
Yeah. Right. So you mentioned, like, when you were describing your education, you're like, definitely not professional. So my question for you now is, do you consider yourself a professional right now?
I think now I do. I've baked in bakeries before, so I've had that professional experience, and I got those jobs from my website, from my blogging experience and from my social media and from all of those things. And I remember thinking at that time, this is so weird that they're looking at my Instagram for a job. But yeah, I started off as like an intern, so I didn't really have any status at the bakery at that point. And then I got jobs through like subsidy programs too, because I wasn't a pastry chef and everybody else was. And so they needed an incentive to hire me, even though they saw my experience. So
what do you mean by like a subsidy program? I've never heard of that before.
Yeah. So actually one of my first jobs at a university was working for the Y. And the Y provides a lot of those programs, but different places, different institutions in the community will pick them up depending on where the government grants go. And they're basically employment programs that are, either provincial or city run, that will subsidize employers to take on people that don't have the technical expertise in that field. So they'll say, I'll give you $10 on the hour, you pay the rest of their wage, because you're going to have to train them, or because they don't have the technical experience, which in my case, I thought was a little bit unfair, because I could do everything that the pastry chefs could do. But for them,
you just were self-taught.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, like, could you send me the link to that?
Yeah, of course.
Program, or if it still exists, I have no idea.
I'm sure it might not be called the same thing, but I'm friends with the people at the Y still, and I'm sure something like that exists still. Yeah, I can send it.
That's really cool. I've never heard of that avenue before.
Yeah, it's great. I had to do like a seminar, like I had to go for like 3 days or whatever, where they teach you employability skills, which is funny because like I taught those classes. And then it was on the other side of things, having to be like, okay. But you need it to qualify for the program. So they'll have usually like workshops and stuff. And as somebody who led the workshops, there would be certain things that I would need to kind of help guide them through the process, because usually those people are at risk, newcomers to the country, maybe don't have as great of a skill set, and it's really about teaching them like what makes you employable and how can you enter the workforce with confidence and get that experience. So they're great programs. Yeah,
that's really interesting to me, because in my experience, like where I've worked previously, I got hired before I became an apprentice. I got hired on the spot with no resume or experience or anything. Yeah. So it's just so interesting to me to see that, like, the barrier of entry, it differs depending on where you go. And it's not something standardized, or it's not like uniform across the board for all bakeries or all employers. And that's really where I find the struggle and some advantages as well. And I guess I want to ask you, like, in your opinion, what do you think are the pros and cons of that?
So like running as a business or working in the bakery
Um,
or both.
both,
Yeah.
whichever side you know want to answer, you see.
So I think the advantages are always that, if you have the tenacity to learn, you can build your skill set up without an education. Um, and that will allow you to you get what you put into it, right? If you want to learn how to make meringue and do a proper macaronage and make choux and do all of these things on your own, and you have the patience to learn those skills without having someone teach you the specifics, then I think that's great, especially if you can get a job at a bakery and that's what you want to do. The disadvantages, of course, one, if you have a proper education that gives you a certain level of legitimacy, that's very easy to understand for people. If you tell people you're a pastry chef, it means a certain base level of kind of skills. Whereas if you rely on someone else's testament to what they can do, that can kind of vary a little bit. It's not to say every pastry chef is the same, because they're not. And I think in a work experience, to be the person that isn't a pastry chef in a room of people who are pastry chefs sucks. I know the owners treated me really poorly, and I could never figure out if that was because of where I was from, if that was because of something about me specifically that they didn't like, if it was because they didn't feel like I was competent enough, when I was more, in my opinion, I was more competent than a lot of the actual pastry chefs that were there, because I had to work harder to teach myself all of those things. So I think it can be both. In my situation, having the prerequisite knowledge to get that foot in the door was really helpful. But I think baking in itself in the food industry is very tumultuous. And I don't know what part of that had to do with my experience, or what part of it's just a tumultuous industry in general, in terms of trying to secure proper hours and employment, make a living wage and all of those kinds of things. And as you know, working at a bakery, the hours are horrible. Having to wake up at midnight, having to wake up at 2 a.m. and not be able to function kind of as a person. That would have been the case if I was a pastry chef or not. So some aspects I feel like it's an advantage, because I'm a very type A person, and I like to learn, and I'm able to shut out everything else if there's something I want to like focus in on. So for me, it worked well, because I'm happy to teach myself things. I can see that not being helpful for people who need the structure and that kind of degree at the end, because it does provide a certain sense of legitimacy, I think, that I felt like made my experience worse in some situations.
Legitimacy to who? To people that you were working with, or to customers now that you run your own business? Or
yeah, I think more to the bakery owners, and I think that is 100% individual. I really do, because the one owner she brought me flowers on my last day. She's the one who advocated for me to be there. She still messages me now to, cheer me on. So I think it is a very individual thing, but the one, she just never recognized me. Anytime I did anything, she was constantly asking me why I did things that way and correcting certain things that I was taught to do by the other people who are working there, but when they did it, it was okay. And so I think that legitimacy, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think it's very dependent. And for my customers, I don't think they care about that, to be honest, because I think for them that distinction doesn't mean as much.
Right. So I guess I think I know the answer, but I would want to ask you, would you call yourself a pastry chef, since you have all of the same knowledge? And
I would reluctantly in certain settings. If you know better, I would not, because you know what I mean? Like, I think to the general public, I would very loosely call myself a pastry chef. To people who are trained in that field, I would be more comfortable saying I'm a pastry baker or a baker, only because I think that the chef title when you're working in a food establishment is very important and does carry kind of a certain connotation.
Mm.
That being said, as a business owner, I develop my recipes. If you ask me to make any level of French pastry, I can do it. So I feel like as a business owner, yeah, I'm the head chef here, but in another
Right.
setting, that might not be a title that I'd be comfortable kind of giving to myself. So
And it's because is it because you didn't go through the formal education route?
yeah, I think so. And that's a personal thing too, right? There's people that I see call themselves chocolatiers, and I just that I'm like, you're not a chocolatier because you don't have X, Y, and Z thing. But am I just projecting that because we have this assumption that you need a certain level of education to give yourself a title? I mean, somebody who has a carpentry business might not be a board certified carpenter, but they can do all of the same things. So it's interesting how we do, you know, you can't
But
call yourself,
yeah, but I was
sorry,
gonna say, but for some reason, they can still call themselves a carpenter
yeah,
in layman's terms.
for sure.
But someone such as yourself, you don't even feel comfortable calling yourself a chef.
Yeah. No, I don't at all. And I think that it's unfortunate that it is that way, but I just feel like maybe it's an individual thing. I'm pretty negative on myself. So I feel like, oh, well, I can't call myself this because then there will be people who don't validate that experience for me, even though I do all of the same things. So
Mhm.
it could be just me. I don't know.
It's just interesting that like the industry doesn't even regulate
Yeah.
how people are entering it, but somehow you're describing that you've experienced hostility,
For sure.
between pastry chefs and yourself
Yeah,
in an industry setting.
for sure.
That's so. What do you think? I guess I'm so curious to hear what you have to say about this. Do you think that the industry or the trade should be regulated?
So I have mixed feelings about that. It it's hard because I think what's happened now with COVID, and it's no secret to anybody that the amount of bakers has proliferated. I mean, this is
Yes.
the I have a licensed health inspected kitchen, and I talked to him pretty candidly about the landscape, and he's like, it's unbelievable the amount of complaints or the amount of calls that they get reporting people who are operating food businesses illegally, not just baking, just food businesses illegally,
Hmm. Hmm.
is in the hundreds. So I think for me, it's hard to have a business that I'm trying to make my sole source of income, to see it unregulated to the extent where there's just no sort of consistency in terms of what can be done in that field, because it is so hard. I mean, they loosened the restrictions for COVID for what can be a home occupation. And so
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
that last side of things. Then there's the people who aren't regulated at all. And my only issue with that is that it does devalue the market. It's oversaturated. And when you are trying to make money and charge a proper living wage, the expectations of what that value of that good should be become very skewed because
Right.
the market's saturated with all of these different products. So in that sense, I do want some regulation, but then I feel guilty because I don't have the education that most people would think would create an actual legitimate business owner or a legitimate chef. So I'm torn between the two. On the one hand, yes, but then I would have had to chosen a different avenue to enter my business, right? So it's tough.
It is, but now that you're like established and you run a license home business and everything, let's say, I don't know, all of a sudden overnight something happened and the industry was now regulated.
Hmm.
Would you feel the need to have to go back to school?
I think if I had the financial freedom to do that, I would. I love school. Like my family jokes that I would have just gone to school forever and just collected degrees like candy. Like I love like I just loved it. You know, for me it was a really rewarding experience. So if financial things considered, if it was viable for me to do it, I would, not because, well, now it's mandated and I have to. I would just because I would want to do it. And I think for me, it would be fulfilling to have that thing that I finally have. Okay, well, now I can actually say it without feeling like I don't deserve it. I can say that I'm an actual chef. So I think for me, yeah, but I can see that not being valuable for people who aren't in the position to do that. I mean, I'm a single person in terms of not being married, not having kids. I don't really have anything that's prohibiting me from doing that. A lot of these people who have businesses have families and have things that would make that really hard.
Right.
So I would probably, but what the logistics of it would be, that would impact that decision for sure.
Right. So I guess you're saying unless it became absolutely necessary,
Yeah,
it's not something you would have to do or like
yeah,
necessarily make sure you do.
yeah. I think it depends too. With pastry, I did talk because at one point the bakery was going to offer a program that would subsidize culinary school. And so that was something that really appealed to me. And that was one of the reasons I chose that bakery over others.
Mm-hmm.
When I was talking to the girls there in terms of trying to understand, like, is it worth it for me to go this route? Because it's going to take a couple of years and it's going to delay kind of the business that I was starting at that time. And their feedback was that their experience didn't necessarily help with what they were doing now. Because with any kind of education, you get a general knowledge, and then the specifics of what you want to do are skills you have to hone on your own. You're going to have the general know how to do it, but not everybody who goes to culinary school is able to do a 4-tier wedding cake. It's just the logistics of, you know, they'll be able to do it, but they're not going to know everything about that specific thing. If you want to make cakes, that's something you're going to have to kind of venture out on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was talking to them about how applicable that experience was going to be, it was kind of a mixed bag of reviews. So I think it depends to what you want to do. If, you know, for me, working with chocolate, I wouldn't have learned as much as I am now just focusing specifically on chocolate. So
That's very true.
yeah.
Yeah. As someone who went through one of the only college programs offered in Ontario at Niagara College for baking and pastry arts, it's because it's taking like information that is supposed to be spread out over a 5-year apprenticeship and shoving it all into 1 year. You really just, at least I felt it was a good program, don't get me wrong, and I loved it and enjoyed my time there, but you really are just getting like an introductory education for each category. I'd say, you know, bread, cakes, chocolate, sugar work, you know, you just scratch the surface. And so one of the things that is, you know, just plaguing my mind is that enough for the industry?
Yeah.
And my inclination is no. It's not. Like, we need talented, especially with what consumers are demanding now, you know, farm to table ingredients, from scratch baking.
Yeah.
I feel like we need more education, you know.
Completely, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that I picked up some, because there's a lot of freeze dried stuff in the chocolate for moisture purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking with the lady who owns the business, and she has a farm, and they had the kind of like a surplus multiple years in a row of all of these like amazing ingredients. And they usually can them or turn them into jams and do all of these things like farm communities do.
Yeah.
And she just decided to freeze dry some of that stuff instead. And we're talking about like the food system and just the pacing of life in general in North America and all of the kind of food shortages that they're having in the States. And it's like the system itself is broken. I mean, how we view food and how we interact with our environment and like this, it's not sustainable. And I think that just having our food education or culinary education system be so rushed and like hectic is just shows how little we value that. And the people who are making our food are really important. And the people who are growing our food are really important. And having food be grown locally and made locally, that should be something at the forefront of people's minds in terms of health and having the sustainable economy, but people don't think of it like that. And so I think it's definitely the reflection of a broken system in terms of that, because you're right, it's not enough time. And the reason for that is that everybody's in such a rush to kind of get people out the door. And in the food industry, they're in such a rush to get that food on the table or get that product out to market, or to get that without consideration for, are my employees happy? Are they making a living wage? Is the quality of the food that I'm actually producing good? Or am I taking shortcuts because we have to produce so much in order to just make ends meet?
And so quickly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Do you think that there's still a heavy reliance on convenience products?
Oh yeah, for sure.
In the industry?
Yeah, I would say so. And again, that push from, you know, for me, I love making everything from scratch. Like, I'm puritanical about it. I mean, roasting the hazelnuts, peeling them by hand, which is a big waste of time. I should blanch them first, but that's besides the point. Doing all of those little things, right? That, you know, making my gianduja from scratch and hand tempering my chocolate, and making the shortbread, and doing all of these, you know, making every element is very difficult to have good margins doing that, especially if I was going to outsource that labor to somebody else. It's very difficult. And so I think at every step of the food production process, people are trying to take shortcuts just because they can't afford to do things properly. I mean, if I wanted to spend all day making something, but I can only charge X amount for it, what has to go is my labor. And a lot of businesses and a lot of companies think like that. And that, you know, I think a lot of people are really ignorant to the fact that really poor people in really poor, impoverished areas do not have access to healthy food. They do not have access to organic kale or even just high protein, low carbohydrate, low high fiber meals. They just don't have access to that stuff. It's not even in their purview of having access to that stuff. So yeah, I think convenience for sure at every level of the food production system is huge. And I see it a lot in other baking businesses too. And it does make me upset because I feel like it's not recognized how much I put into every element of what I do. And it's really hard for people to value that when the price point of what they're doing is just so much more accessible.
So do you think your customers, they want that from scratch baking that you're offering, but they don't understand how much it would cost to pay for that because other places are not doing it?
I think so. And
I think the demand is there?
I think partly it is, you know, I mean, my retail value for the giant chocolate bars is $25. It's not cheap, but I educate people and I put videos out about the process and what goes into it and how much time it to try and justify that price point. And people do seem to be responsive to that. They enjoy the content and they enjoy seeing how it's made and all of those things. So I think for some people, yeah, they understand that, or they want to support businesses like that. But they might not follow that in every aspect of their life, right? They might want to support a small chocolate entrepreneur, but not pay for their meat. Or they might not want to spend that money, you know, paying for the person who's going to lay the tile in their kitchen. Like, everybody has what they understand to be of value. Everybody has differences there. So I hope my clients have that, or appreciate that, or wanting that from scratch experience, or at least tasting the difference between something that is made fresh that day versus something that was, you know, and there's nothing wrong with freezing. Okay. I'm not saying they don't, because a lot of people are like, oh, it was frozen. I'm like, we freeze lots of stuff. Chefs use freezers.
It's part of the process sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. But, you know, of a frozen, you know, grocery store cake that they got Pillsbury mixed cake in that they've, filled with the better cream whippable frosting that's $15. It's a different product, right? It's not to say it doesn't taste good, that you can't buy it and enjoy it. It's just a different product.
I don't know. To me, it doesn't, no offense or anything, but it doesn't taste that great.
And it doesn't.
I'll be honest. I don't like
it. But, it's for people, everybody has that thing that they just don't care about. It's like, oh, well, it's the same thing. It's, and having a TikTok account has taught me a lot about the malicious things that people are thinking in their brain, because people on TikTok just put it out there into the world. Like so I hear those comments all the time. Like I had to turn off comments because there was just hundreds of thousands of me being elitist or ripping people off or whatever the case is. It's like, no, we just don't value that in our society in terms of how much it costs to produce good food. So
what do you think it's going to take for people to start valuing that?
Honestly, a collapse of the entire system, literally. Like, but I only say that to be dramatic. Like, I mean, like if people like had to grow their food, you know what I mean? Like if you had to go out there and get eggs from your chicken and slaughter that chicken and rotate your crops and plant vegetables and deal with pests, and then try and process some of the grains you were growing and then try and keep them for a year without going bad, and then having to can your, like if you were involved in every step, people would go crazy. That's why communities come together for those kinds of things, because everybody takes one part of that really complex system. And I hate to say it, but I don't think people would really understand unless they're put in that position of like, oh my God, I have to go to Ecuador to get the cocoa beans and then ferment them for 7 days and then roast them and then buy a mélanger and then get, that like it's impossible to show people every step of the process for everything. It wouldn't work. But I think for some people it would take that level of like, oh my God, we're all gonna die. To really like understand, because like a lot about food and I know a lot about food, and there's still moments where I'm like, oh, I can't believe that was so expensive. And
yeah, definitely.
Like no,
when the price of butter went up, I was like, no.
Yes, or when the farmers changed the cow feed and the palm oil made the butter hard, and it was just like, this is like the worst thing ever.
Well, we could talk about butter for a long time.
We really
not even really butter anymore.
Yeah. So like, I don't know what would have to change in order to see change. I think if the landscape of the economy was a bit different, and as things kind of go back to normal, whatever that means for people, it will be more of a test as to what the longevity is of some of the food systems that the new food systems that we've created. Because were you doing it because you had CERB payments and you could afford to charge peanuts because you enjoyed doing it, versus now that you're actually like, I don't believe a lot of the people who have food businesses actually know how to calculate cost. I don't think they know what margins are. I don't think they understand what overhead is. I don't think they understand labor. And so when push comes to shove and you really have to think about those things, how many of those businesses are going to stay open, and what is the landscape going to be of all those restaurants that have closed, and of the food prices that have gone up, and of all of these things. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I think it's going to be scary in certain instances, because the food system is unsustainable. So it'll be interesting to see how that levels out and how people, what they do with that information.
Do you think the education of these bakers, pastry chefs, and business owners has to change for some kind of solution to come about?
I think so, honestly. Even just from a business sense of things, like purely from an economical standpoint, people should know how much something costs genuinely to produce. And I think that a lot of people who don't know that, they're just hurting themselves in the end, and I'm sure you've felt that when you charge too little for an item and then it leaves and you're just like, what was I thinking?
Oh yeah.
It gets you into that rut really fast. And when passion isn't enough to carry you through that. after years of kind of like being in that situation. So I think just from an economical standpoint, there should be some level of like, listen, I have to pay for my license. I have to pay for the health inspection. I have to pay for, fire. I have to pay for zoning. I have to pay for certain elements that I need to work that into my cost. Everything from shipping to packaging to wholesale prices for community partners, all of those things. If there was a certain procedure in place, people are going to have to figure out that their prices are unsustainable quickly. And they might need to adjust them early on versus having to figure that out after so long. And that's true for me too. It took me a long time to kind of figure out that I was really not pricing things properly and I was not making the most of my time. So,
right.
Yeah, in a certain sense, I think it would be helpful, but I don't know how you execute that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you regulate this industry again. That's really what I'm trying to explore.
Yeah.
But it seems just from our conversation that it would definitely benefit from some kind of regulation in terms of even opening up a business and the people who are actually opening up these businesses to have a certain level of education, like you're saying, not just in baking and pastry arts, but in entrepreneurship, finances, how to open up a business, food in general. Yeah, it doesn't seem like the way that we're going is comprehensive enough.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think a lot of that has to do with making things accessible to people, right? I mean, how many more doctors would we have if med school was accessible to people and who people had access to a good education in this country, even though they can't afford it, purely based on their merit, right? And so I think a lot of what we pigeonhole people into certain positions in life is really unfair, because it shouldn't be because of someone's financial freedom that they have access to certain things. There's a lot of skilled people, a lot of smart people, a lot of talented people who just don't have the proper avenues to success because they either don't have the knowledge of how to access those resources, or they don't have the actual physical resources to gain entry into those systems. So yeah, I think for sure.
Yeah. I'm just like, the thing is that something that was so great about the apprenticeship program, and I'm early in my research, so right now I'm a big advocate for it, but I'm so sad to see it go because it is very affordable. I mean, you get on the job training and you're paid, whether that place chooses to start at minimum wage or not, you still are getting paid to learn that skill. And then the in-school training is partly subsidized by the government. So the cost is not high. Like, I was enrolled in that apprenticeship program and I'm still technically an apprentice. I'm just having trouble finishing it because of low enrollment. I have one more level of schooling left.
Yeah.
And I can't finish it because the class won't run.
Oh my God.
There's no apprentices anymore because anyone can become a baker. And just enter the industry, and they prefer to do those 1 or 2 year college programs instead of doing that 4 to 5 year training, which is a lot more affordable, by the way. And you don't have to take OSAP. They just don't want to have to wait, since the industry doesn't demand that they have to do that anymore.
Right.
Is there anything else you want to add that you didn't really get to talk about, but like you have a burning passion for it?
Oh, I have a burning passion for lots of stuff. I don't think you don't want to open that can. I don't think so.
I got a taste of it. You like, clearly, I'm really happy I like reached out to talk to you because you clearly think about these things and you're concerned about them.
For sure. And I have zero people who care in the same way that I do to talk about it with.
Well, I'm doing my whole master's about it. So anytime, girl, whenever you want to talk or you want to vent, I can't take it anymore, dude.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. No, passion, yes, but no, I don't want to waste any more of your time. But
no,
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I feel very flattered for making the cut here.
Of course, yeah. I there's no cut for me. Like, I recognize that, if the industry isn't going to regulate who's a baker and who's the pastry chef and all that stuff, who am I to say or
Yeah.
make any kind of differentiation?
Yeah,
I
that's
think
fair enough.
honestly, in my opinion, and this is kind of unfortunate, you know, it's not a very good reflection on our education system, but self-taught bakers and
Mhm.
pastry chefs, they are they tend to be more technically proficient,
Hmm.
talented, and knowledgeable in my experience, because
Hmm.
something about having to take that on for yourself, you just get more in depth than what some of the alternatives right now and, you know, the educational landscape can offer.
Hmm.
Kudos
Interesting.
to you. It was
Thank
great.
you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's something I would boast
Thank you.
if I were you.
Maybe I'll get there one day. We'll see. We'll
I
see.
hope so.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Dina. I appreciate
Anyways.
it. I'd love to. I want to keep posted on your research. Please feel free to send me bits and pieces of information that you think are interesting.
Yeah, sure. And if you can send me a link to that
Yes.
program that you did, that would be really great. Thank you so much for your time, Summer.
Yeah, of
And
course.
you know, I'll include all of your links and stuff to your business pages so
Thank
that,
you.
you
Yeah,
know,
that'd be
my
great.
classmates or the public or whoever is going to be looking at this can reach you.
Awesome. Love it.
Thank you.
I'm here for it. Thanks, Tina.
You have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.